A prison is not defined by its walls, but by the certainty that nothing inside it can change. Every lock exists to remove possibility, every rule to eliminate choice. Yet, history has shown that systems built on absolute control often overlook one detail. The human mind does not stop working simply because it is confined. This story follows a man who enters one of the most secure prisons in South Africa, not as a criminal, but as a problem the system believes is already solved. The events unfold in the late 1970s, during the height of apartheid. South Africa is rigidly divided by race, enforced through law, surveillance, and intimidation. Opposition is treated as a direct threat to national stability, and even peaceful resistance is classified as subversion. In this environment, the government's power appears total, and its institutions appear unbreakable. Tim Jenkin is not a public figure, nor a revolutionary leader. He is an ordinary young white South African, educated, quiet, and methodical. What sets him apart is not aggression, but refusal. He refuses to accept that injustice should be ignored simply because it benefits him. While many around him remain silent, Tim chooses involvement, believing that awareness is a first step toward change. Alongside his close friend Stephen Lee, Tim becomes involved in distributing political pamphlets. These pamphlets are carefully written, designed to expose the realities of apartheid and encourage critical thought rather than violence. The operation is discreet, relying on planning and anonymity rather than confrontation. For a time, it works, but the state is vigilant. Surveillance networks are wide, and informants are common. Eventually, Tim and Stephen are identified, arrested, and detained. Their capture is swift and efficient, reinforcing the government's message that resistance will always be found and neutralized. The arrest marks an abrupt shift. There is no dramatic struggle, no public spectacle. Instead, there is paperwork, silence, and the steady removal of freedom. From the beginning, it is clear that the outcome has already been decided. Their trial is formal but hollow. Charges are framed under terrorism laws. Despite the nonviolent nature of their actions, evidence is presented selectively, intent is exaggerated, and context is ignored. The court does not seek understanding, only confirmation. Tim listens carefully throughout the proceedings. He does not argue emotionally or attempt to justify himself. He studies the process with the same calm attention that would later define his survival. When the verdict is delivered, it arrives without surprise. Both men are sentenced to long prison terms and transferred to Pretoria's Central Prison. Pretoria Central is not simply a prison. It is a symbol of state authority, designed to contain political dissidents and isolate them from the outside world. The architecture is imposing, the routines rigid, and the atmosphere deliberately oppressive. Upon arrival, Tim is separated from Stephen and placed in solitary confinement. The cell is small, bare, and deliberately disorienting. There are no clocks, no meaningful human interaction, and no variation in routine. Days blur together. Meals arrive without conversation. Lights are controlled externally. Silence becomes a constant presence. At first, the isolation is destabilizing. The absence of stimulation amplifies every thought. But gradually, Tim adapts. Instead of resisting the silence, he begins to use it. With nothing else to focus on, his attention turns outward to sounds, patterns, and repetition. He notices how often guards pass his cell. He listens to the subtle differences in footsteps. He observes how keys sound when inserted into locks. What begins as boredom slowly becomes analysis. The prison, once overwhelming, starts revealing its structure. Tim realizes something important during these early months. The system depends on routine. Guards rely on habit. Locks rely on consistency. The prison operates not through constant vigilance, but through predictable behavior. This realization does not immediately form into a plan. It exists only as an idea, quietly taking shape. For now, survival is a priority. After several months, Tim is moved out of solitary confinement and into the political prisoners section. There, he is reunited with Stephen. The relief is subtle but significant. Communication, even limited, restores perspective. In this section, Tim meets other inmates who share similar convictions. Among them is Dennis Goldberg, an experienced anti-apartheid activist who has already spent years behind bars. Dennis understands prison not only as a physical space, but as a psychological battlefield. Dennis observes Tim closely. He recognizes intelligence and restraint, qualities that are rare in an environment where frustration often leads to recklessness. Conversations between them are measured, focusing on endurance, discipline, and the importance of mental resilience. Life in the political section follows strict routines. Prisoners are monitored constantly, but the isolation is less severe. Tim continues observing. He studies doors, hinges, and locks with quiet interest. While others see barriers, Tim sees mechanisms. Over time, his curiosity deepens. He notices that every cell door, every internal barrier, relies on a physical key. These keys are not abstract symbols of authority. They are objects governed by precise mechanical rules. This observation becomes a turning point. Tim begins to wonder, not whether the prison can be escaped, but whether it can be understood. He does not share this thought immediately. He knows that ideas can be dangerous if spoken too soon. Instead, he begins testing small assumptions privately, starting with the simplest question possible. What if a lock is only as secure as the belief that no one will try to understand it? This question does not yet threaten the prison, but it changes how Tim sees his confinement. The cell is no longer just a place of waiting. It becomes a place of study. Unaware of what this curiosity will eventually lead to, the prison continues operating exactly as designed, confident that control has already been achieved. The transition from curiosity to intention does not happen suddenly. It develops quietly, shaped by repetition, and reinforced by evidence. Each day inside Pretoria Central Prison follows the same structure, and it is precisely this predictability that allows Tim Jenkin's thinking to evolve. What once felt like an unchangeable environment now begins to resemble a system governed by rules that can be learned. Tim continues observing the locks. He notices how guards rarely look directly at the mechanisms they use dozens of times a day. Their attention is on compliance, not function. Keys are inserted automatically, turned without inspection, removed without thought. This routine, meant to reinforce authority, also creates blindness. Inside his cell, Tim begins working with whatever materials are available. Small pieces of wood from food trays, fragments from everyday objects, anything that can be shaped without raising suspicion. At first, the work is abstract. He studies proportions, imagining how metal teeth interact with pins inside a lock. Without diagrams or tools, everything relies on memory and logic. He understands that mistakes are inevitable, but mistakes, if made privately, are harmless. They become information. His first attempts are crude, wooden shapes that resemble keys only in the most basic sense. When tested discreetly on his own cell door, they fail completely. But failure confirms something essential. The lock responds consistently. It does not change behavior. It follows mechanical law. Tim refines his approach. He begins carving with greater precision, adjusting shapes incrementally. He tests at times when guard presence is minimal, always restoring everything to its original state. Over time, resistance gives way to movement. The lock reacts. The moment the key turns, even slightly, something fundamental shifts. The prison has not changed, but Tim's understanding of it has. The door remains closed, but it is no longer absolute. He does not celebrate. He does not rush. Instead, he repeats the experiment until the movement becomes predictable. Eventually, the lock opens. This success does not trigger immediate escape attempts. Tim understands that opening a single cell door proves nothing unless the entire system can be navigated. The prison is layered, designed with multiple fail-safes. Each door leads only to another. Still, the psychological impact is profound. The prison has revealed a flaw, not in construction, but in assumption. It assumes that no one will try. Tim begins sharing his progress cautiously with Stephen. Stephen listens, skeptical but attentive. The risk is obvious. Discovery would mean isolation, punishment, and possibly transfer to a more severe facility. Yet the logic is difficult to dismiss. Stephen raises concerns about consequences beyond themselves. If guards discover tampering, conditions for all political prisoners could worsen. Tim acknowledges this. The goal cannot be reckless freedom. It must be precise, quiet, and leave no immediate trace. Dennis Goldberg is eventually brought into conversation. His experience gives weight to discussion. Dennis does not discourage the idea outright. Instead, he asks difficult questions. Why escape? What does it achieve? Who bears the cost? Tim explains that escape is not just personal. It challenges the image of total control the regime depends on. It demonstrates vulnerability. Dennis understands this argument, but also understands the risks. After careful thought, he decides not to participate. His presence and survival inside the prison still matter. This decision shapes the plan. If escape happens, it must not implicate those who stay behind. With renewed focus, Tim expands his work. He begins mapping the prison mentally. He counts doors between the cell block and the outer perimeter. He notes which locks are used where and which keys are carried by which guards. Patterns emerge. Some doors are rarely opened. Others are used multiple times daily. This tells him which locks are more familiar and which might be neglected. To build accurate keys, Tim needs better materials. Wood alone is unreliable. Through careful manipulation of routine interactions, he gains access to slightly stronger materials, plastic, scraps, anything that can hold shape. Each new key is tested, refined, and memorized. As his skill improves, so does the complexity of the plan. Tim realizes that escape will require perfect timing. Guards follow schedules, but schedules can shift. Any deviation could expose everything. Stephen becomes deeply involved now. He helps track guard movements and count seconds between patrols. Together, they build a shared mental map of time as much as space. However, progress attracts danger. Small irregularities begin appearing. A lock feels different. A guard pauses longer than usual. These moments create tension. The prison has not noticed anything specific, but vigilance is unpredictable. Tim responds by slowing down. Rushing would be fatal. Every step must be reversible until the final moment. As weeks turn into months, the idea of escape becomes real, not as fantasy, but as a logistical challenge. The prison is no longer a mystery. It is a sequence. Yet, one crucial obstacle remains. Even if every internal door can be opened, the outer exit is different. It is designed to be the final barrier, the point where failure becomes unavoidable. Tim knows that if this lock cannot be replicated, everything else is meaningless. Unaware of how close they are to crossing an invisible line, the prison continues its routines, confident, orderly, and quietly vulnerable. As the plan grows more complete, the margin for error begins to shrink. What once felt like careful experimentation now carries real weight. Each new key represents not just progress, but risk. By this point, Tim Jenkin understands that the most dangerous stage of any escape is not the execution, but the preparation, when repeated behavior becomes visible. Inside Pretoria Central Prison, subtle changes begin to occur. Guards appear more alert, though no direct accusation is made. Lock inspections become slightly more frequent. Keys are handled more deliberately. These changes are small, almost imperceptible, but to someone who has been studying the system daily, they are unmistakable. Tim responds by adjusting his behavior. He becomes more compliant, less noticeable. Conversations are shorter. Movements are slower. His demeanor projects routine and predictability, reinforcing the image of a prisoner who has accepted his circumstances. Behind that calm surface, the work continues. The keys are now refined to a level that surprises even Tim. They are no longer approximations. They are precise tools, each memorized, each associated with a specific door and sequence. He practices the order repeatedly in his mind, rehearsing transitions, imagining delays, accounting for human error. Stephen's role becomes increasingly vital. While Tim focuses on mechanics, Stephen monitors the environment. He tracks guard behavior, noting changes in shift patterns and identifying moments when the prison seems most settled. Their communication is careful, often indirect, relying on shared understanding rather than explicit planning. The pressure is constant. Any single discovery, a key fragment, a damaged lock, an inconsistent door, would unravel everything. Punishment would be severe, and suspicion would extend beyond them to other political prisoners. This reality forces difficult decisions. Tim considers abandoning the plan more than once. The ethical implications remain unresolved. Escape would mean freedom, but also scrutiny. Guards would be investigated. Security tightened. Those left behind would suffer increased control. Dennis Goldberg becomes an anchor in these moments. He reminds Tim that intention matters. If the plan proceeds, it must leave as little trace as possible. The goal is not to humiliate the prison, but to leave it confused, unable to explain what happened. As surveillance pressure increases, one critical flaw emerges. The final outer doors, the administrative barriers separating the prison interior from the outside world, are different from the internal locks. They are heavier, used less frequently, and guarded by stricter routines. Tim needs access to these locks without drawing attention. This requires a calculated shift in strategy. He begins requesting minor privileges, presenting himself as cooperative and reliable. Over time, guards grow comfortable with his presence in certain areas. Familiarity replaces suspicion. This is not manipulation through deception, but through consistency. The prison rewards predictability. Eventually, Tim gains brief access to the administrative corridor. These moments are fleeting but sufficient. He studies the doors quickly, memorizing details under pressure. Every second matters. Back in his cell, the challenge intensifies. Replicating these final keys is more difficult than anything before. The tolerances are narrower. The locks are less forgiving. Several attempts fail entirely. Failure now carries emotional weight. Time is running out. Increased vigilance suggests that the window for escape is closing. If the plan is delayed too long, the opportunity may disappear permanently. Stephen notices the strain. Conversations grow quieter. Mistakes, though minor, become more costly. One night, a key jams briefly before releasing. The sound is subtle, but enough to freeze both men in place until the corridor settles. That moment becomes decisive. Continuing indefinitely is no longer safe. Either the escape happens soon, or it does not happen at all. Tim and Stephen agree to set a date. The decision transforms preparation into countdown. Every action now leads toward a fixed point. They stop experimenting. No new keys are made. Everything relies on what already exists. They rehearse mentally, repeatedly. Tim visualizes each door opening smoothly. Stephen times each movement, accounting for hesitation and recovery. They anticipate failure scenarios and plan responses that minimize exposure. Despite the tension, clarity emerges. The plan is no longer theoretical. It is complete. The prison, meanwhile, continues operating with quiet confidence. No alarms are triggered. No accusations are made. Guards follow routines, unaware that the system they trust has already been mapped in detail. The final nights before the escape are marked by restraint. Tim avoids unnecessary movement. Stephen limits conversation. Both understand that emotional release must wait. There is no dramatic declaration, no symbolic gesture. The escape will not be an act of rebellion, but of execution. When the chosen night arrives, the prison settles into its usual rhythm. Lights dim, footsteps recede, silence returns. Inside that silence, the plan waits, fully formed, irreversible, and ready to be tested against reality. The night chosen for the escape begins like every other. That sameness is essential. No unusual sounds, no raised voices, no visible tension. Pretoria Central Prison settles into its nocturnal rhythm, guided by routine rather than vigilance. Guards complete their final checks. Keys clink softly, doors close, and the corridors empty. Inside his cell, Tim Jenkin does not pace. He does not rehearse physically. Everything that can be prepared already has been. Movement now would only increase risk. Instead, he waits, measuring time internally, listening for subtle signals that indicate the prison has reached its quietest state. Stephen does the same. Their cells are close enough for a brief visual confirmation, but far enough to prevent conversation. They do not exchange words. Nothing more needs to be said. When the moment arrives, it is not announced by drama, but by absence. Footsteps fade. The building exhales. Tim retrieves the first key. The opening of his cell door is deliberate and controlled. The key enters smoothly. There is no resistance. The mechanism turns exactly as rehearsed. The door opens just enough to allow passage, then closes again, restoring the appearance of containment. Stephen follows shortly after. The timing is precise. Too soon would overlap movements. Too late would compress the schedule. They meet silently in the corridor, not looking at each other for reassurance, but focusing forward. The first internal door lies ahead. This lock has been tested countless times in secret. Still, each attempt carries uncertainty. Tim inserts the key and applies steady pressure. The lock yields. They pass through and repeat the process, door after door, corridor after corridor. Each successful opening reinforces the logic of the plan, but also increases exposure. The deeper they go, the fewer options remain. At every stage, they restore doors behind them. This is not simply caution. It is strategy. An open door invites suspicion. A closed door maintains illusion. As they approach the administrative section, the environment changes. The air feels different. These corridors are cleaner, less worn, and more heavily regulated. Guards rarely linger here at night. But when they do, there is little margin for concealment. They pause, listening. Nothing. Tim proceeds. The next door presents a new challenge. This lock has not been tested under pressure. The key fits, but the mechanism resists slightly. For a moment, everything stops. Tim adjusts the angle, recalling the internal structure he studied only briefly. The lock turns. They move again, aware that hesitation compounds danger. Each second spent inside the administrative area increases the likelihood of discovery. A distant sound interrupts them, a door closing somewhere else in the building. Both men freeze. They wait, counting silently. The sound does not repeat. Whatever movement occurred, it is not approaching. They continue. Now only the outer barriers remain. These final doors separate the controlled interior from the unknown outside. They are designed to be absolute, reinforced by the belief that no one could reach them unnoticed. The first outer door opens without incident. The second does not. The key enters, but the lock refuses to turn fully. This is the point no rehearsal can fully prepare for. Tim applies gentle pressure, then withdraws slightly, recalibrating his approach. Too much force would create noise. Too little would achieve nothing. He tries again. The lock shifts. A final adjustment, subtle and precise, completes the motion. The door opens. Beyond it lies the last obstacle, a gate leading directly outside the prison's inner perimeter. There are no further layers. Success or failure will be immediately visible. Tim does not rush. He positions himself carefully, shielding movement from potential sightlines. Stephen stands ready, watching the corridor behind them. The key slides in. For a brief moment, nothing happens. Then the gate unlocks. They step through. The outside air feels unfamiliar, not because it is dramatic, but because it is unstructured. There are no walls guiding movement, no ceilings compressing sound. Darkness replaces enclosure. They close the gate behind them. This detail matters. An open gate would trigger questions too quickly. A closed one delays understanding. Once outside the perimeter, they do not run. Running suggests panic. Panic attracts attention. Instead, they walk calmly, following a route chosen for its anonymity rather than speed. Their clothing blends into the night. Their movements are ordinary, From a distance, they resemble workers finishing a late shift, not fugitives escaping a maximum security prison. Only when they are far enough away do they allow themselves to separate slightly, reducing the risk that a single encounter will compromise both of them. Inside the prison, nothing changes immediately. Guards complete rounds, unaware that containment has already failed. Doors remain closed. Logs remain accurate. The system continues operating under false assumptions. It is not until later, when routines begin overlapping in unexpected ways, that suspicion arises. By then, the prison's certainty has already collapsed. Tim and Stephen continue moving, navigating through prearranged contacts and routes designed to obscure their origin. Every step beyond the prison increases distance not just physically, but psychologically. They are no longer inmates. They are evidence. Evidence that systems fail not through chaos, but through understanding. The most dangerous moment of the escape is already behind them. What remains is survival and a careful avoidance of attention. Behind them, Pretoria Central Prison remains intact, silent, and unaware of how completely it has been undermined. The discovery of the escape does not happen with alarm bells or dramatic confrontation. It begins with confusion. Guard conducting routine checks notice inconsistencies that cannot be explained immediately. Doors are locked. Logs are accurate. Nothing appears broken. Yet 2 prisoners are missing. At first, the assumption is procedural error. A recount is ordered. Keys are checked. Guards retrace their steps, convinced that a mistake in record-keeping must be responsible. The idea that inmates could pass through multiple secure doors without force feels impossible within the logic of the institution. As the reality settles in, the atmosphere inside Pretoria's Central Prison changes. Confidence gives way to suspicion. Guards are questioned. Supervisors demand explanations that no one can provide. Every assumption the system relies on begins to fracture. An investigation follows, thorough and relentless. Locks are dismantled. Doors are inspected. Yet even under scrutiny, the mechanics reveal nothing unusual. There are no signs of tampering obvious enough to justify the outcome. The prison cannot point to a single moment where control was lost. This is the most unsettling detail of all. The escape did not occur through violence, bribery, or external assistance. It occurred entirely within the system's own rules. Every door functioned as designed. Every guard followed protocol. The prison did not fail because it was weak, but because it trusted its own certainty too completely. As authorities widen their search, Tim Jenkin and Stephen Lee are already far beyond immediate reach. Their escape route had been carefully constructed, relying on trusted contacts and anonymity rather than speed. Each stage removes them further from the environment that once defined them. Eventually, they leave South Africa. Outside the country, the escape becomes public knowledge. International attention shifts toward the story not as an act of defiance, but as a demonstration of ingenuity under repression. The apartheid regime, already facing growing criticism, is forced to confront the symbolic damage caused by the incident. Inside the prison, consequences are swift. Security procedures are tightened. Political prisoners face increased scrutiny. Movement becomes more restricted. While the escape exposes systemic vulnerability, it also reinforces control in the short term. This outcome reflects a difficult truth. Acts of resistance often carry unintended costs. Freedom gained by some can result in greater pressure on others. The film does not simplify this reality or offer easy justification. Dennis Goldberg remains behind, fully aware of the consequences. His decision not to escape now carries deeper meaning. Resistance takes many forms, and not all of them involve leaving. For Tim, freedom brings responsibility rather than relief. The escape does not erase the injustice that made it necessary. It merely shifts the context. His actions become part of a larger narrative, one that exposes how power depends not only on force, but on perception. The prison believed it was unbreakable because no one had ever tested it seriously. Its greatest defense was assumption. In the end, Pretoria Central Prison did not lose 2 inmates. It lost the illusion of absolute control. The story closes not with celebration, but with clarity. The escape is not framed as heroism or spectacle. It is presented as a logical outcome of observation, patience, and disciplined thinking applied within a system that underestimated the human capacity to learn. The most important question the story leaves behind is not how the escape was possible, but why it was never expected. If a system depends on the belief that no one will challenge it, what happens the moment someone decides to understand it instead? And if stories like this help uncover how power truly operates, then continuing to explore films with clarity and intention ensures that these lessons are not forgotten. For those who value calm, thoughtful storytelling that explains not just what happens, but why it matters, staying with this channel means staying curious, staying informed, and continuing to see stories beyond the surface. And subscribe to Film Recap for amazing stories.